Okay, we're going to call the Santa Barbara City Council's Ordinance Committee to order for April 19, 2011. And would you call the roll for us, please, Lori?
Chair Grant House.
Here.
Member Rouse.
Here.
Member Hotchkiss.
Here.
Okay, very good. We're going to be taking up the subject of single-use bag reduction today. And who's going to head up the staff report here? Let's see.
Staff presenting today is Matt Four, the Environmental Services Manager.
Thank you, Matt. Good to see you today.
Good to see you. So good morning. With me today is Mr. Robert Samara, the Finance Director, as well as Ms. Lorraine Cruz Carpenter, an Environmental Services Specialist 2, and also the coordinator of the voluntary Where's Your Bag program that the city currently operates. We're here today to discuss with you the issue of single-use bags, which the Council referred to the Ordinance Committee back on February 1st. We're here to present some additional information on some options that were referred along with that, or as part of that referral, and then to seek your direction and answer your questions. By way of background, it's estimated that about 12 billion plastic bags are used in California each year. Based upon the proportion of the city of Santa Barbara's population to that of the state of California, it's estimated that about 325 bags are used per person in the city of Santa Barbara. And about 5% or less of those are currently recycled. To define the scope of the problem, as we look at it within the context of this city, the broader region, and even globally, within the city, when we looked at the waste composition of the city's trash that currently goes to Teaguas landfill, back in 2009, we found that 1 to 2% of the waste stream that's currently buried is composed of specifically of plastic bags. From the marine environment, we know from published data, a litany of reports that marine species are often harmed when they mistake plastic and bits of plastic for food, and they ingest that, and it's harmful to marine life. This may be of greater importance to the city of Santa Barbara as a coastal community. When we look more globally, we know that, for example, with the Pacific Gyre, the large pile of garbage that's been washed out to sea, we know that at least a portion of that is composed of plastic bags. And staff also surveyed other city departments. We talked to the Harbor Patrol, to the Parks Division, Creeks Division, and Streets, and found varying reports as to how often they see plastic bags. The Harbor Patrol, interestingly, said that they see plastic bags. They do see them in the harbor occasionally, but what they really find a lot of are beverage cups of all different kinds. Parks does not see plastic bags very often. As we indicated in the staff report, the Creeks Division reported that of 268 litter sites that were cleaned up in fiscal year 10, well, of those 268, all of them contained plastic bags. So they would still have to clean those up even with action by the council, but they were present. And the Streets Division, we were unable to get very solid data, but we were invited to come out and take a look at the street sweepings after those occurred to look at the waste characterization there. The final point is that plastic bags, as you all know, are derived from fossil fuels and oil, a non-renewable resource. So really, to frame this issue, this is really not so much a diversion issue, being that plastic bags represent only 1 to 2% of our waste stream, but really a litter and a non-renewable issue, and also the issue of marine health. There's also quite a bit of published data on life cycle comparisons between plastic, paper, and reusable bags. Life cycle analysis looks at from the production to the use to the disposal or recycling of each type of bag, how much water is consumed, what the air emissions would be, the energy inputs, water pollution, and also water use. And what most life cycle analysis find is that reusable bags overall have lower environmental impacts than all types of single-use bags that are studied. Air emissions, waste production, and water pollution associated with paper bags is equal to or greater than plastic. And among single-use bags, those that are recyclable yield the greatest environmental benefit. For example, plastic bags that are readily recyclable.
Would you repeat that, please? That
Sure.
last part you were just talking about.
Oh, sure. So among single-use bags, just among those that are single-use, those that are recyclable, readily recyclable, for example, paper, are environmentally preferred because at least they have an end-use option of being recycled into new materials. Whereas plastic bags, for example, are not as readily recyclable. They're not as easy to recycle. In fact, some of the studies have found that producing plastic bags from virgin material is actually more cost-effective than recycling plastic and making it into new bags. So that's what that point is getting at. So as stated earlier, on February 1st, Council did refer 4 specific options for staff to evaluate, namely to take no further action at this time, to recommend an ordinance mandating that retail stores adopt elements of the voluntary Where's Your Bag program. Thirdly, to recommend a city ballot measure to decide whether a tax should be imposed on either or both single-use plastic and paper bags that are distributed by retailers in the city. And fourthly, to recommend an ordinance to prohibit the distribution of single-use bags by retailers. And so that's what we're here to really get more into. Just a bit about the methodology, how we went about producing the information that you have in your staff report. Staff surveyed 12 other jurisdictions' actions to reduce the distribution of single bags within their municipalities. We focused much more attention on the cities of San Jose, Santa Monica, and LA County because those are considered second-generation ordinances. They're the most modern, and they have built improvements into the first generation that some of which were challenged legally. We also evaluated the impact of each of these options on 4 different variables, on the consumer, on the city, on retailers, and also the environment. There are also some policy considerations that are associated with all of these options that would help to further frame those. One is, there is an opportunity or there's a question as to whether the city would like to take a leadership role in this issue or to continue the momentum of the actions that other jurisdictions have taken. The second is along the spectrum, we find that some of the options are more voluntary and education-based versus mandatory and have an enforcement or a penalty associated with noncompliance. The third is the issue of the city taking local action and implementing its own option, or to wait for the state to enact statewide legislation. There are a number of bills that come up every year that pertain to plastic bags, either a prohibition on their distribution or additional take-back and recycling elements. And I just put one example up, and that's SB 1998, that was not approved last year, but just as an example for your reference. So under option 1 of taking no action at this time, under this option, retailers could continue to distribute both single-use plastic and paper bags with no restriction. And staff would continue to raise awareness of the benefits of using reusable bags through the voluntary Where's Your Bag program. And currently we have 12 stores that are participating to varying degrees within that program. Staff focuses on raising awareness of this program through various marketing campaigns, tabling events, and we have some data on the effectiveness of the program, and we're always trying to get additional data of that. Also under this option, consumers could continue to receive plastic and paper bags without restriction. Retailers would continue to pass on the cost of the bags, of plastic bags, of approximately 2 to 3 cents per bag. The impact of the city would not incur any additional costs beyond those that are already allocated to removing single-use bags that are a component of the litter and illegally dumped waste that we currently, several divisions already clean up on a regular basis. There would really be no impact to the retailer under this option. And for the environment, as we stated previously, marine species are harmed by ingesting plastic, including bits of plastic bag. We would have further depletion of non-renewable resources, and as we discussed previously, plastic bags are not practically recyclable or not as readily recyclable as, say, paper bags. Under option two, the council would adopt an ordinance that would require retailers to implement the elements of the voluntary Where's Your Bag program, and that would include posting signage for patrons to further understand the benefits of using reusable bags. They would provide educational materials, including brochures and window decals. The retailer would train their staff to understand these benefits and to pass these on to the patrons. And also, the retailer would make reusable bags available for sale at the point of purchase. And finally, and kind of a critical element is that the retailer would report to the city on a quarterly basis on how many customers are using reusable bags so that we could actually track the effectiveness of the program. So this option simply puts teeth to the voluntary program that is already in place. One of the other policy decisions, should your committee or the council opt to look into this further, would be what kind of stores this would apply to. And what we've seen in our surveys is that some ordinances of this type apply to grocery stores only, some to hybrid stores that sell durable goods as well as grocery items, for example, a Walmart, and then others encompass all retailers that that package their goods in bags of any type. So under this option, again, under option two, the voluntary or implementing the elements of the Where's Your Bag program, consumers could continue to receive plastic or paper bags, but they would be encouraged to use reusable bags. The city would incur the cost to implement the ordinance, monitor the reporting by the retailers, and then take enforcement action against non-compliant retailers. And just by way of background, in fiscal year 2011, the City Environmental Services Division allocated $23,000 in staff time and $15,000 on educational materials and outreach. We did receive another $14,000 in private donations, which were also put toward education and outreach efforts. Under option two, retailers would incur the cost to train staff, supply educational materials, install signage, and track and report reusable bag usage. The cost of a typical package of educational materials that the city currently provides to the stores that are participating in the voluntary program is approximately $200. And under this option, you know, the impact of the environment really depends on how many consumers switch to reusable bags as a result of this program. To give you one...
Excuse me, your $200 figure, is that per store?
Per store.
One time?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
As the initial packet to get started. One store, Tri-County Produce, which has implemented this program with substantial zeal, has found an increase of 36% in its use of reusable bags by its patrons under this program. So they have seen a fairly substantial increase and a fairly successful implementation. But for other stores where they're required to put this into place, if they're not as if they don't do so with as much enthusiasm, you know, the effectiveness, we're not really sure what that would be. That would wait to be seen. Other considerations with this option would primarily comes from Assembly Bill 2449. That's existing legislation that requires grocery stores to take back and recycle plastic grocery bags. Those are available now. You'll see them in front of grocery stores. This law does prohibit municipalities from requiring additional reporting regarding plastic bag usage, but it's silent on reusable bags. We have spoken to the city attorney's office, and if a successful challenge were likely or were foreseeable, council could defer action on this item until after January 2013, when this bill is scheduled to sunset. The third option, under this option, the city would, excuse me, under this option, the city would put forth a ballot measure to apply a tax on either paper or plastic bags. And under this option, consumers could continue to receive both plastic or paper bags, but the voter-approved tax on paper bags, plastic bags, or both would be levied. Depending on the type of the levy, the measure would require either a simple majority or a 2/3 majority. If it's a special tax in which the proceeds are earmarked for a specific purpose, a 2/3 approval would be required. And for a general tax in which the proceeds would become part of the general fund, a simple majority would be required. Staff would recommend a tax on paper bags coupled with a ban on plastic bags, however, and we'll go into that more under option 4. And if the goal of these actions is to fundamentally reduce the use of plastic bags, we would find that under option 4, the ban on plastic bags and the fee on paper would likely yield the greatest result. Also under option 3, the impact to the consumers who choose to purchase plastic or paper bags would pay an estimated $32 to $81 a year, and that is based upon a fee ranging of 10 cents to 25 cents per bag, based upon our data that, or our assumption that Santa Barbara citizens use approximately 325 bags per year. So that's how we derive that number. Consumers who switch to reusable bags would have an initial investment of $8 to $24, which is our cost estimate for the typical individual or household to procure reusable bags. Under the option 3, the city could conduct a survey of voters to gauge support for such a tax and the level of the tax before moving forward, and that was something that we had discussed in previous council report. And the cost of this survey is estimated to be about $25,000. The city would also incur the cost to place the question on the ballot and assess any taxes that are ultimately approved by the voters. There is a potential for this tax to generate some level of revenue for the city. Staff would have to do additional research on that to give you more specific numbers. And the city would incur the cost to conduct environmental review of such a ballot measure because ballot measures are subject to environmental review under CEQA.
Excuse me, any idea of the cost of that?
The cost, based upon our surveys, the cost for the full EIR option for the outright ban on plastic bags range from $50,000 to $100,000. Whether that would be similar to this, it's probably a good starting point. We could tighten that up if that's your wish.
Thank you.
Under option 3, the retailer would incur the cost to collect and report tax revenue to the city, similar to the paperwork that's done or the documentation that's submitted for the remittance of transient occupancy taxes currently. And finally, the impact of the environment under option 3, a financial premium on one or both types of bags, staff believes would likely result in a reduction of plastic bags in the environment with that additional surcharge. And finally, the final option that we looked at is a city ordinance to prohibit the distribution of single-use plastic bags and impose a fee on single-use paper. So it's very similar to option 3, other than this would include an outright ban on plastic bags and a voter-approved fee on paper. So under this option, council would adopt an ordinance, again, prohibiting the distribution of plastic bags by retailers and placing a fee on paper. The cities of San Jose, Santa Monica, and Los Angeles County have adopted similar ordinances in the recent past. In those jurisdictions, the retailers actually did retain all of the revenue that was generated to help offset the cost that the retailer incurs by implementing this program. And again, the city attorney recommends seeking voter approval for the fee on paper bags under this option as well, because of the issues inherent with Proposition 26. Under this option, consumers, very similar to option 3, consumers who choose to pay the fee on paper bags would pay an estimated $32 to $81 a year, as we previously discussed, again, based upon an assumption of a fee between 10 cents and 25 cents at a rate of bag use of 325 per year. And consumers who switch to reusable bags would again have an initial investment of $8 to $24 to purchase those. The city would incur the costs associated with the environmental impact analysis. We would incur the cost of staff time to develop, circulate, implement, and monitor and enforce the ordinance. When we surveyed the city of San Jose, in the past year, they expended 4,000 staff hours to undertake this exact action. Admittedly, the city is larger than Santa Barbara. And tax revenue could be earmarked for a specific purpose or could be unrestricted in the general fund under this option. The impact of the retailer would save approximately 2 to 3 cents on each plastic bag that's currently distributed under this option. And depending upon how the tax proceeds are allocated, the city could opt, or the council could opt to allow some sharing of that revenue that's generated with the retailer. And finally, the impact to the environment. Staff feels that this option would yield the greatest reduction of plastic bags and have the greatest benefit on marine health and litter prevention of all of the options considered because of the ban on plastic and the surcharge on paper. Other considerations, as with options 3 and 4, the imposition of a fee on bags could be construed or would be construed as a tax under Prop 26 and therefore could be subject to voter approval, and that's why we're recommending that course of action under those two options. Since February 1st, just to bring your committee up to speed on recent developments in the arena of plastic bags, Save the Plastic Bag Coalition, which is a coalition of a number of large bag manufacturers, filed a lawsuit against the County of Marin challenging its ordinance banning plastic bags and imposing a 5-cent fee on paper bags. It's interesting to note that Marin County invoked a categorical exemption under CEQA, and they opted to forego the environmental impact analysis and then were sued as a result. And the city of Oakland, who had also not prepared an EIR, was also sued by the Plastic Bag Coalition and lost that suit. And with that, staff would be glad to answer any of your questions or accept any further direction that you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fort. We have some questions here, and I don't have any speaker slips. Did anyone turn any in today? Okay, we've received, if anybody's so moved, you're welcome to, and while we're asking our questions. Mr. Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going back to the initial part of your presentation about the number of bags per, or the usage per year, 325 per year.
Right.
And if I'm doing the math right, if you said it was, what, 29, we're about, is that per every man, woman, and child in Santa Barbara, basically? Is that
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the usage on those, that's extrapolated from just the population of Santa Barbara divided by the number of bags in California. There's not we didn't go out to stores and grocery stores and say, what did you go through usage-wise? What have you distributed?
That's correct. We looked, what staff did, we looked at a number of reports from across the state and even the nation on estimates on the number of bags used and found that the 12 billion citation and conclusion was consistent across most of the literature, so we felt comfortable using that.
Okay, I would think that especially in an environmentally conscious community like Santa Barbara, I think our usage would probably be somewhat less than in other communities around California. But
Just to add to that, we did find with the city of Carpinteria, we were able to contact the Albertsons store there. The Albertsons grocery store, which is only one store in the city of Carpinteria, there are a couple. On an annual basis, they distribute 973,000 plastic bags from that store alone.
And is that the one that's currently going through their program where they're getting rid of their plastic bags?
That's correct.
Good, so we should talk about that more later on. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll ask a quick question here. The fee on paper, are there any places that have that you know of that have had the retailers charge and keep the money rather than having it go into the public general fund or something like that? And how does that work out?
Yeah. Santa Monica, San Jose, and LA County, the retailers all retain the revenue that's generated.
I see. And they've been challenged on the basis of, they didn't do votes of the people for those.
3 jurisdictions were not challenged. LA County, Santa Monica, and San Jose have not been challenged.
I see. So the fee, so far the fee on the bags, if it were, at least at this point, if it were to go to the retailer, has not yet been challenged.
Not yet.
I see. Interesting. That was done just by ordinance?
They did an EIR. Yeah, all 3 of those jurisdictions did conduct a full EIR.
I see. And then a question on the EIR part, and then I'll get over here to Mr. Hotchkiss. Since environmental impact reports have been done in these cities, and it's the same phenomenon. I mean, these are supermarkets, and these are people buying products the same as we do here. To what degree can an environmental impact report for those jurisdictions be useful here without us having to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch?
I think they're largely useful. I mean, I think with the city of Santa Barbara certainly has its own unique characteristics that would have to be factored in, but much of the, for example, the life cycle analysis, the usage, and certainly the environmental impacts, many of them would translate well.
Okay, very good.
And staff has been actively reading those,
Oh, really? Okay.
for that very purpose, just to familiarize ourselves with that.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Hotchkiss, I think you had some questions.
Mr. Samario, we mentioned 4,000 staff hours to conduct option 4, I think, and maybe 3 too. What does that represent dollar-wise? Either one of you, whoever would like to speak.
We do have that, I believe. Yeah, it equates to about 2 full-time employees. I mean, I could look up their...
We're talking about $150,000?
It's probably a good starting point, probably a little bit higher. San Jose has fairly robust salary schedule.
Mr. Samario's flashing the deuce sign here, so I think 2, right? Right. Victory, peace. Okay. Do we have public comment?
We may in just a moment here, but if you have any more questions, go right ahead.
I got a bunch, but let's see what public comment is. Thank you.
Mr. Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We talked about, was it SB 2449, about the plastic bag recycling. And earlier in your presentation, you discussed the costs of recycling plastic bags versus paper bags and the effectiveness of it. I know that back in the 70s when Europe was introducing the plastic carry-out bag to grocery stores, they had some type of recycling. Who knows how effective it was back then. But I also know part of the theory was that the use of timber and pulp, and of course then what it takes to recycle paper and to create new paper, is also environmentally very costly, energy-wise as well as effluent-wise. Do you have any kind of data or any kind of cost comparisons for those, just so, and if you're trying to figure out what you would do and make the best case scenario, how that would work?
Just so I'm clear, the information on the cost to recycle plastic bags?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
That's the one piece of information we were not able to retrieve before this meeting. We got costs on what they cost the retailer to procure and distribute from their stores, but the actual take-back cost we don't have at the moment, but I'd be glad to get that.
Well, I was thinking when they developed 2449, they must have gone down that path, I would think, to see what kind of products are produced and what the cost per unit is. And
Well, I mean, just what we did find was from, a cost notwithstanding was what you had mentioned, and that's from a life cycle analysis standpoint, the energy inputs, the water costs, energy costs, and those impacts are very similar between plastic and paper, other than paper are more readily recyclable than plastic, and plastic are produced from the non-renewable resources.
thank you.
And the paper does decompose relatively rapidly. Am I accurate in saying that?
If it is not entombed in a landfill, that's correct.
If it gets into, the point being, if it gets into the ocean where it can do harm to
then it would break down
to
fairly
marine
quickly.
animals,
Right.
and then it would break down and not.
Studies have not shown, harm or impacts to marine life from paper bags.
Mr. Smart, did you have something more to say to this question that was just asked? I'm sure we all have many more questions. We have a couple of people who'd like to speak. Kara Redmond, Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, will be followed by Kathy King, Choose and Reuse. Yes. Oh, let me turn on your microphone, please. Okay, start again, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kira Redmond. I'm the Executive Director of Santa Barbara Channel Keeper. As you've heard from staff, disposable bags, both plastic and paper, have significant environmental impacts. They also pose a strain on our local economy, spending money on cleaning up litter. The citizens of Santa Barbara are ready and willing to shift to reusable bags and to lessen these impacts. Channel Keeper alone has circulated a petition, which I believe you've received copies of, among Santa Barbara voters. And almost 1,000 voters to date, just from our efforts alone, have expressed their recommendation to you to pass an ordinance that would implement a ban on plastic bags and a fee on paper. And Channel Keeper also strongly urges you to do so. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Just to give an example, this is one of, I think we've received hundreds of emails, many of them similar. Dear Mayor and Council members, I'm concerned about the environmental and economic costs associated with disposable bag use. Cities and counties across California and the nation are taking action to prevent plastic bag pollution by banning disposable plastic shopping bags, as well as placing a nominal fee on paper bags. And it's time Santa Barbara joins the growing effort to address the costly environmental problem. I strongly support and urge you to enact a plastic bag ban in Santa Barbara as soon as possible. That was signed by Sarah Danielson, but she's similar to many others who sent that to us. We have next up is Kathy King, followed by Luis Morrow.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for considering this regulation. It's very meaningful to a great many of us. In addition to what Kira was saying about all the petition signatures that you've received via email, I'm also a partner in the Where's Your Bag program, and we conducted surveys when we were out on State Street giving out bags, asking people what they wanted to see from us in terms of bag regulation, and more than 50% of our respondents said that they want to remember to bring their bags, but they need help with that. So to me, that's the perfect role for government here, is to provide a tool to help people do what they want to do, which in my mind is the right thing, by bringing their own bags when they go to the store, by considering any of these options that you have before you today, hopefully one of the more stringent ones. Coastal communities across the globe, from Bangladesh to Australia to Rwanda to China to the Chesapeake Bay Area and all up and down the Pacific coast, have taken action on this issue because they recognize that we need to keep our oceans healthy. And this is a first step. There's a lot of plastic out there, and plastic bags are contributing to it. This is a first step in reducing that problem, and I really thank you for considering doing something about it. It's the right thing.
Thank you very much. Luis Morrow, followed by John Dixon.
Hi. Thank you for listening to us and taking this on. I'm a parent, filmmaker, and I also have a site that I play with called The Plastic Challenge. There are some cities in the East Coast who are also taking this on. Kathy mentioned pretty much the whole international community. The simple question I have is, my daughter's 5. What do we say to her when she's 20, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, when none of us are here and plastic is still here? I think you guys are the ones that, to provide some leadership here. I think that's it. I don't know if it's a statement, not a question, right? So, but like,
Good.
what do you.
Good. Sounds like she almost wants to testify here.
Well, she does. She does. They actually already are taking on stopping plastic. They tell me not to buy plastic bottles anymore. Thanks.
Oh, really? All right. Thank you very much. Thank
Education.
you. All right. Very good. Mr. Dixon? John, thank you for your leadership on this with your Tri-County Produce.
Yeah, you're welcome. Actually, with our program where we donate a nickel for every reusable bag a customer comes in, it's already given, we've given $4,200 to local charities from that program. And, you know, since we started it, I think I've supplied you with earlier numbers, and it was stated earlier, we've seen a 36% increase in people bringing their own bags to our store. And I just think as a society that, of course, we should reduce the single-use bags, you know, plastic and paper, but I think it's naturally happening through like what we're doing in our store with the program. And I think I liked option 2 that was on the board of maybe turning the Where's Your Bag campaign into making every store do something like that versus I don't think a lot of people like new taxes on things right now, especially in this economy. And I don't like the idea also of new taxes and fees on bags, but I noticed that more and more people are definitely choosing to reuse the reusable bags from Trader Joe's to our store to everywhere, and I think it's a growing thing. So if we can get more people on board with the program, that would be great. I'm paying 3 cents for plastic and almost 12 cents for my paper bags. If there's no plastic at all in the situation and there is a big spike in paper bags, of course, economically, the cost would go up a lot to me in my store if I was giving more paper bags out the door. One of my concerns is related to the fees. If there is a fee on paper bags, they ban plastic and a fee on paper, would the big stores be able to absorb and say, well, we're not going to charge a fee, you know, and suddenly it's not a level playing field if bigger stores don't even charge it at all, and I get strapped with suddenly tripling or quadrupling my paper bag usage in my store. So it's a tough one to figure out which one to choose, but I like so far option 2 that's on the board.
Sounds like you like it when people actually bring their own bag in, though.
I love that.
That's the best option of all. All right, very good. Thank you so much. And that raised a question for me. Maybe staff, you can help us. I've seen some of these ordinances are really crafted to focus on the large retailers. I don't think that I've seen. Well, maybe you can help me with that. How much are they geared towards the mass merchants, the large supermarkets, and that kind of thing, as opposed to a smaller enterprise like Mr. Dixon's?
Excuse me. The ordinances we've seen, they generally have a square footage or a retail sales threshold. So, say $2 million in retail sales, or a couple of them we've seen are, say, 20,000 square feet. Others do not make that don't make that distinction, and they apply it to the type of store regardless of the revenue or the size. It's just
like, what do you mean by type of store?
You're a type of grocery store, or if you vend these types of goods, then you would be subject to the ordinance. So that's a policy decision that could be made.
Okay, and of the organizations you cited here, the ones that were the most recent ordinances, what did they do? Ms. Carpenter? Thanks for being here today.
Hi, thank you. The City of Santa Monica has the ordinance, which is it pertains to grocery and pharmacy stores. That includes convenience and liquor stores. San Jose, it oversees all stores except eating establishments. So all retail stores are included in the ordinance. And then LA County is a lot more detailed. They go into gross sales of $2 million, and they look at what types of goods are sold, or it has to be 10,000 square feet. And it has a number of different breakdowns that categorize these stores that are under the ordinance.
I see. It's quite a process they went through to
Yeah.
come up with that one. All right, very good. Other questions from the committee? Thanks. We're going to close the public hearing at this point. Thank you all for participating. Yes, Mr. Hotchkiss.
I got a bunch here. AB 1998 failed by only got 14 votes, I think, in the Senate. It seems to me that one of the reasons it failed was that it was. One of the reasons it failed was it was regulating choice, and it placed a burden both on consumers and businesses. This, I think you'd agree, asks both consumers and businesses to do things differently than they customarily do them now. millions and millions of these bags are used, as you said, and I think as other people have said, each year in California because people, at least in my opinion, find they save time and effort. My first question is, which of these bags here would actually be affected? Can you come up and take a look? We have two kinds of plastic bags here, and
Why don't you turn on the microphone there for yourself there and just turn it around so you can speak.
get that. There you go.
Under most of the ordinances that we've looked at, this type of, carry-out plastic bag would be regulated.
The typical grocery bag you get at the end of the line when you're checking out.
The surcharge or fee is generally applied to the paper. I think all of the ordinance, and I'm looking at Lorraine on this, I believe all of them that we looked at had exemptions for produce, produce and food packaging.
Right. Anything.
Ms. Carpenter, go ahead.
Anything for your vegetables, those bags that you get for vegetables,
Okay.
and also raw meats, things
Okay.
of that nature that could leak.
So typically
Those are
if you've
exempted.
got oranges and bananas and stuff, you use a bag for each one of those, and you weigh them when you go out or whatever. So we have a lot more of these bags than we have one of these, right?
Correct.
Okay. And this is the typical paper bag. So we're really not affecting most of the bags that we use. We just would be affecting some of those bags. Okay. What I've been able to discover is that I think your figure may be high, but it's represents about 1%. Even this number of bags represents about 1% or less of landfill volume.
That's correct.
Okay. And if we go to a cogeneration plant, that actually becomes fuel. I don't know if you knew that, but that actually becomes something that we can get electricity back from. I was at first affected, as you may have been, all of you may have been, by the claim that plastic bags affect marine life. Obviously, we as a coastal community, that's important. But little research indicates that there's actually no evidence that plastic bags pose any direct threat to marine life. That was a misconstruction of a report first made by the Canadian government on Newfoundland in 1987, I think it was. And then subsequently, they didn't make the mistake. They just referred to plastic, which it turns out they were talking primarily about nets and wire, etc. And then that was reiterated by mistake in an Australian study that it's changed plastic to plastic bags. So we suddenly had 100,000 species being affected or eliminated, or whatever the term was, by plastic bags. But then that was subsequently corrected to eliminate plastic bags and again revert to the original study, which was plastic nets and wire, etc. So the conclusion of that from David Santillo of Greenpeace says it's very unlikely that many animals are killed by plastic bags. Well, that was encouraging to me because nobody wants to see that happen. Still, the argument was plastic, and I think some people here have said that in the past, plastic disintegrates in the ocean as it does. Everything has a life cycle, and so plastic disintegrates and in minute portions enters our food stream, which also sounds pretty awful. But in fact, it turns out that plastic is indigestible. You can ingest it, but not digest it. Polyethylene, from which 85% of our plastic bags are made, is non-toxic and indigestible by both birds and sea mammals. So, in fact, what happens is if it's eaten, it passes right through the system for them as well as us. In other words, it's inert. This brings up another point, which I also found surprising, and maybe it comes as enlightening to you. The suggestion or the assertion that plastic bags are made from petroleum. I thought that was a given. It turns out that polyethylene is actually an ethylene derivative, and it comes from ethyl, which in turn comes from not petroleum but natural gas. So, but that's only 85% of our U.S. bags, which many of which are not even made here. So, any elimination, even if we did it nationwide, would only affect 15%. Of the bags involved, and the other 85% would have no influence at all vis-a-vis our oil use. Regarding paper bags as averse to plastic bags, I was surprised to learn also that, at least by any study that I could find, that paper bags have a much greater impact on the environment. I thought, like most people here, including my colleagues, that paper naturally disintegrates quickly, etc. But from a life cycle study, the British government's environmental agency issued an assessment that first off, 40.3% of plastic bags are reused, not recycled, but reused. In other words, we take them home, they end up in the refrigerator, we have a pet, we use them that way. There are a lot of different ways. And if you open your refrigerator door tonight, you'll probably look in and see a bunch of plastic, just like I do at my house. Not consciously thinking I got to reuse these, it's a natural way to use them, and I think an efficient one. Let's take a look at some of the places where a ban has been initiated, such as San Francisco, the so-called San Fran ban. People believe that if plastic bags are banned, people will switch to reusable bags, but this is apparently wrong, judging from the results of San Francisco. In 2007, the city of San Francisco passed an ordinance banning non-compostable plastic carry-out bags in supermarkets like we're doing, the ones we held up here, and grocery stores with more than $2 million in annual sales, and chain pharmacies. That's pretty small. It doesn't take a lot to get over that threshold. It was found that all food chains affected by the ordinance, in fact, had just switched to paper bags only, which paper bags, if you want to make the environmental argument, have a greater effect on the environment and take much more energy, much more water to manufacture than plastic ones. This study also said that very few people brought reusable bags to the store, and in fact, no more than in other cities. Again, this is all news to me, so I kept looking, and regarding reusable bags, which are, I think, anecdotally more and more popular here in Santa Barbara, they in fact lead to some problems that I was surprised at, including bacteria, because naturally you use them over and over again. That's their function. You mix in whatever you have from your groceries, which generally includes meat and vegetables and eggs and cereal and chicken or whatever. And then those bags, you get them home, you empty them, and then they usually sit in your trunk of your car, if you're anything like folks I know, where in the course of time they get heated. The bacteria produced is enormous compared to anything in a plastic bag, particularly an unused plastic bag, which has negative bacteria. So, in fact, unless reusable bags that we typically think of, like the Trader Joe's bag or whatever, are washed every time, they in fact carry real risks to them that never occurred to me. And I don't know anybody who goes home and after they empty their groceries, there may be a few people that puts them in the washing machine, but if we were doing it right, that's what we would do. But I think that that's probably asking people too much. As you pointed out, I think that without an EIR, we probably, or at least should expect, a challenge, as Manhattan Beach is undergoing now, among the others, that would be to some extent expensive in defense. Either we have an EIR or we have to defend the fact that we don't. In either case, it's costing the city money. So, insofar as plastic bags being a trash problem, they supposedly comprise about 1% of litter. hard to measure, but the real causes of a litter or sources of litter are these things. And sorry, but I'm not going to stop drinking this. So if we were really going to be aggressive about addressing something, we would try to ban these, but I don't think we want to do that either. So, but there are people that feel strongly as I do, and then people feel strongly against what I do. I think Mr. House is probably one of them. So how do we make those two things work together? The thing that seems to me to work best is to let people make their choice by their own conscience and act accordingly. And I do see more and more people doing that, either carrying their own reusable bag, or oftentimes it's, I don't have enough room in my reusable bag, so I end up using a plastic bag too, which is probably the best of both worlds because it addresses both convenience and environmental concerns. So I feel that the education program that we're doing is, as Mr. Dixon points out, working in his case, that we should not incur additional expenses for our city and for our staff, and actually for the people too. Then it would be best to go forward as we are now. Thank you very much, Mr. House.
I was waiting for the question. I knew it was coming somewhere in there. I think the question was, how do we reconcile the perspective that was represented in your
right, and then I gave the conclusion to that.
I got it. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Rouse, what you got?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I can match Mr. Hodges' fact-finding there, or hopefully I'll have a question here somewhere myself. Actually, I do have a question for Mr. Wiley. Option 2, as I recall from our last discussions, were there some legal issues about requiring in-store signage?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Rouse, possibly. I don't want to overstate this. What is being referred to is the AB 2449 requirements, and let me just mention again. AB 2449 is scheduled to sunset December 31st, 2012, so a little over a year and a half left on that state law. But it does provide, let's see if I have it handy here, it does have some language that indicates that it's preemptive. Here it is. For example, it says that a local ordinance or a city or county could not require auditing or reporting requirements that are in addition to that which is required by subdivision D, in addition to the 2449. So that's, if, one of the, and let me just say as well, I think staff would agree, we're not sure what we mean or what is meant by converting this voluntary ordinance into mandatory, what the exact parameters are. But some people have suggested that we impose some additional reporting requirements on grocery stores. Well, this seems to say that you can't impose additional reporting requirements or auditing requirements with respect to plastic bags. AB 2449 is really only about plastic carryout bags. And so you can't impose additional reporting requirements and say, I want you to file a quarterly report with the city to tell us how many plastic carryout bags you are handing out. On the other hand, again, we're not sure what this ordinance would provide. Possibly we could have an ordinance that had them provide us with a report as to how many reusable bags they're selling, not plastic carryout, but reusable. And maybe they could tell us how many customers are using reusable bags. That might be good information to have, and I don't think it's clearly prohibited by 2449. 2449 also is preemptive with respect to how you recycle plastic bags. I know you've probably seen those containers out in front of all the grocery stores where you can stuff your plastic carryout bags. That's a result of 2449, those containers, and how that all works is preempted by 2449. So, like I say, depending on exactly what our mandatory voluntary ordinance were to say, it's probably doable. I think then option 2 sort of raises the question, what's the point? And I should say, I suspect that most grocery stores and grocery store chains would be willing to go along with a few of these things that are being suggested because they're doing it now. So that we were to make it mandatory, they might say, well, that's fine. We do it as a corporate entity anyway. We don't really care if you make it mandatory. And we might get some stores that aren't complying to do it. We might have some additional signage at each of the checkout stands, and they'd say, well, you know, we do that anyway. So I don't want to overstate the legal concerns, but it does then, it's like, well, how much is it really accomplishing?
Thank you. That's it for my questions, Mr. Chair. Is it
Well, let me
time for comments?
get a little bit out there, and then we'll come back. So I've got a copy of the ordinance from Santa Monica here, and I was looking over its, the findings that they're making in their whereas parts, their resolution part before their ordinance. And Ms. Carpenter, I just wanted to ask you a little bit. We've had some success with the voluntary program, and I think we should be really proud of that. Can you reiterate again how well we're doing and how much more you think you can do with the resources that you've been given?
We've had a lot of success, of course, with a store like Tri-County Produce. With some of the other stores, we found without requirements, it's hard to find out how successful they've been, to require them to give out brochures and things of that nature. We've also, on the staff side of it, have done a lot of outreach and marketing, so it's been really successful in that sense. We've done a lot of tabling, giving out bags that we purchased for the program. As well as you may have seen some of the advertising and the campaign going into that. In terms of the stores, it would be great if we could require them to do some things in terms of seeing what the actual success levels are. Without having a store like Tri-County that's providing information on an ongoing basis and showing those hard numbers, it's hard to tell at this time.
I see. But in terms of your own abilities to do more with the resources you have, I think that's where my question was going. I mean, are you doing as much as you possibly can with what you've been given?
We are. You know, we've given out materials, like we said, to each store, and I think those are sufficient for the stores. We'd like them to ask for more items and to hand those out and distribute them. And in terms of the marketing, we've really pushed on that. We've done a lot of outreach and talking to people, going out to neighborhood groups and things of that nature. So we're really spreading the word in that sense.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'd seen somewhere that that the efforts for voluntary-based programs have been pretty successful, but in the 20-30% range maybe of changes. I don't know if that's really, I don't know how they get their numbers to measuring behavior changes. But it's not as much as happens when there is a fee associated with the paper, associated with the ban on the particular kinds of plastic. Is that accurate as far as you?
Yes, it is. Without going out and doing an assessment, an actual assessment of it, it's hard to tell again what those success levels are. We have put out a plan for the year in terms of outreach and education, and we've met those goals that we've set for ourselves. The County of LA did have a voluntary program that they ran for 2 years. And in the end, they didn't find it very successful because they couldn't figure out at what rate stores were getting people to use reusable bags because it was voluntary again. So they were kind of up against the same things we were, and then ultimately they went to the ban and a fee.
And now they're, are they seeing success?
They actually stopped their voluntary program and moved to the ban on plastic and a fee on paper.
I mean, how do they measure success of their current ban?
They actually haven't started their ban yet. It starts in July. So they're getting ready and gearing up and educating stores and getting ready for it.
Got it. All we know is it hasn't been challenged at this point. I may have some more questions. Yes, sir. Question or?
No, I just wanted to clarify one thing. When we say L.A. County, it's not L.A. County. It's the unincorporated cities in L.A. County. It's not the 88 cities of L.A. County, so it's quite a small part of this. So it doesn't include Santa Monica, doesn't include Los Angeles, doesn't include Canoga Park, or any of those things.
Okay, got it. Santa Monica then had their own ordinance, and that's how they...
They did. And then cities like Calabasas just enacted an ordinance, which they used part of the L.A. County ordinance, the EIR for that.
Most of the... In the city of Santa Monica, now they reckon by population, I'm sure, about 50 million single-use carry-out bags. And most of those are made from plastic or some other material that was not readily decomposable. They had concerns about the bags littering the environment, blocking storm drains, and fouling beaches, which would be similar to our concerns. City taxpayers must bear the brunt of the cleanup costs. They were concerned about that. They said it was a significant source of marine debris and hazardous to marine animals and birds, which often confuse single-use plastic carry-out bags for a source of food. I heard your comments there. I know I've seen some videos of the what animals ingest, and it's pretty rough. I sit on the Beacon board that deals with the beach erosion issues along the coast, and one of the things I found out recently is that I wish we had somebody from Creeks here today, but that the whole county along the coast is way above standard, whatever that is, for the amount of this kind of refuse in our creeks. Somehow it floats up in the air and comes down and gets caught in the brambles and gets caught in the creeks, and then it ends up in the ocean. And they're very concerned about that. So I mean, there's an awful lot here to be concerned about. The renewable resources issue, of course, that's why there's the recommendation that the best method of reducing this kind of use is to combine the ban with some kind of a fee. And I just wanted to go to that fee thing a little bit with Mr. Wiley, if I could. They used a fairly innovative approach in Santa Monica, I think, where they reckoned that having the fee was essential as a complement to the ban to make it be appropriately balanced and effective. Otherwise, you could get a switch over to the paper, which has more resource, is more inefficient use of resources. And they saw fees being imposed by other jurisdictions, significantly reducing the consumption of these bags. But they said that they'd done an analysis and found out what this cost level would probably be best. I think they came up with 10 cents. But they changed it. They said the proceeds from the collection of the paper bag pass-through would be retained by the retailer, and this ordinance does not specify how the retailers must expend the monies collected. Said that the customers can avoid the cost through by using the reusable bags. And then they made this conclusion. This is why I want you to weigh in here, Mr. Wiley. It says no portion of the cost passed through will be provided to the city, and consequently the city will not receive any revenues from the retailer's collection of the paper bag pass-through. Therefore, the cost pass-through is not a fee subject to Proposition 26. And then they go on about how essential that pass-through element is to be effective as a complete ordinance. How do you respond to that? It seems like they're not being challenged. I mean, I would guess the retailers wouldn't challenge it because for them it's actually a chance to recover some of their costs. But
Mr. Chair, that could be accurate, that the retailers wouldn't challenge it because it gives them a chance, an ability to recover their costs and actually to blame the city. So that's the best of both worlds.
There you go. There you go.
But frankly, Santa Monica's probably holding their breath right now. Their ordinance didn't take effect until the end of February. So they're still well within the statute of limitations period for any legal challenge. And in fact, the challenge, if it were to come, would probably be that this violates Prop 218 and Prop 26, which says that cities may not impose fees under certain circumstances. And the question is, when Prop 226, for example, said a city cannot impose a fee without voter approval, did they mean only those fees where the money comes back to the city, or all fees? And I suspect that some court's going to weigh in on that at some point, whether it's Santa Monica or L.A. County or something else. There'll be an organization possibly like the Howard Jarvis group or different taxpayer groups that'll challenge these things. Mm-hmm. That time will tell.
But you don't have a strong position one way or another about it until you see how these things work out in court.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way to know until we see how the courts rule on it.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? Mr. Rouse, go ahead.
No comment.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and start with your comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, not quite as well versed as Mr. Hotchkiss in the facts, but I do have some anecdotes because I am an ocean user and a surfer, a sailor, and a swimmer, and a diver, so I spend a lot of time in the ocean, and I am concerned about plastics. As Mr. Moore was speaking about, there are a lot of plastic issues in the water. the plastic bag themselves just happens to be the low-hanging fruit. It's the most accessible thing to try to get to try to ban. So I get that, and I get that effort. And I don't disagree with the efforts of certainly Channel Keeper or the CEC. But as I listen to some of the comments, like Ms. Redmond, for example, talked about how the citizens are ready to shift, and I agree with that, and I think we are seeing that on a lot of levels. I know programs like Mr. Dixon's have been met with enthusiasm. Certainly Lazy Acres, Albertsons on the Mesa. I was just there yesterday, and they're producing their own bags with their logos on them, so maybe foreseeing some kind of a marketing advantage. And then, of course, there's the Carpinteria Albertsons, which I'm really interested in seeing how that turns out, because that's a great, that's a major grocer that's going after it in that way, and I'm waiting to see the results of that. I think Ms. King talked about the promotion of the Where's Your Bag is something that I really think brings us together as a community. I think the community does support it. That's why I was kind of questioning the statistics on our use of plastic being the same as somebody at Lodi. I really don't believe that's the same thing, because we are a beachside community. We are an environmentally conscious community. As I was out on the Milpa Street cleanup, I found I was thinking about this issue. And I spent 3 hours going up and down the street picking up trash, which I think I finally found my appropriate skill set. But what I found was I picked up an almost entirely black trash bag full of cigarette butts. So if you were to ask me anecdotally what the greatest risk to our marine environment is right now, I'd have to say cigarette butts. But I also know that plastic, the Pacific Garbage Patch is full of plastic. Much of it's bottles, bottle caps. You go to the hardware store, you see things packed in plastic. So how do we really affect change? Well, I think we start affecting change the way you folks are trying to affect it right now. I don't know if it's just going after this one issue. I think it's a greater awareness of what we're doing. You go to the hardware store, you got something so packed up that you can't get at it without a utility knife. It's just encased in this plastic tomb. Well, that's got to go somewhere. And I think that might be what Mr. Moore was talking about somewhat, because that's the stuff that really ends up in the landfills and eventually the marine environment. I was concerned about Mr. Dixon's comments about if you were to do the ban on plastic bags and then up the greater use of paper bags, of course, in conjunction with using the Where's Your Bag, that the cost to that grocer could become that much greater. Let's face it, we're not very organized as a people. I got to go to the store, I don't have my bags with me, boom, you're using the one-time usage bag. Eventually, hopefully, people will get into the habit and start carrying their own bags with them. So I believe there's choice. I think there's also, as I look at the same ordinance, the Santa Monica ordinance that Mr. House was looking at, there's a lot of staff provisions in here about auditing, about staff time, about how you're going to enforce many of the provisions in here. And frankly, I don't see us doing it or having the ability to do it, even if we were to pass something as detailed and as complex as the Santa Monica ordinance. So in conclusion, I'd say if we're going to make an ordinance, number one, are we willing to put ourselves out to the legal risks that are potentially out there? As Mr. Wiley was saying, there's stuff out there right now that's pending that we don't really know about. So why go there? Or are we going to incur the cost of an EIR? Even dovetailing on somebody else's EIR, we're talking about tens of thousands, if not $100,000 in expense to incur an EIR to avoid the CEQA requirements or to comply with the CEQA requirements. And last of all, businesses. What about the business? I don't have any major grocers in here. Not that you're not a major grocer, Mr. Dixon, but the guys in there telling us what goes on in their stores. I would like to see something besides our number of plastic bags in California divided by our number of population. I'd like to know some real hard facts, and I'd like to know their take on what they're doing. And we're going to find out a heck of a lot more, I think, in a hurry from Albertsons and Carpinteria. Hopefully staff or somebody or CEC's following up with them, because I think that's incredibly pertinent data to this type of program. I believe that someplace and sometime we're going to come to a ban on these types of bags. And yes, certain municipalities have done it, but I think at least a countywide, if not a statewide action is really what's needed, not municipality by municipality. Somebody may be making a decision between whether they're going to go to the Goleta Vons or the downtown Vons. just because they forgot to bring their bag, and even though they're going to drive far. I mean, people make irrational decisions like that all the time, but they do. We went through this with the smoking ban years ago. If you guys would remember, we had a downtown bowl, not downtown, San Marcos Lanes versus the Orchid Bowl. And now we can't even imagine that all these places had smoking, bars and restaurants had smoking, bowling alleys had smoking. Well, as we tried to develop our municipal codes, we found out they were so onerous and so hard to audit and so hard to enforce that eventually industry took over, and we have the atmosphere we have today. And yes, there are now statewide ordinances and bans prohibiting smoking in those public areas, and they get refined all the time. But industry was ahead of the curve, and I think what we're seeing between people like Mr. Dixon and Albertsons is industry's ahead of the curve. So I have to wonder why we would jump through these hoops, spend the staff time, and do this, even though I think the end game is worthwhile. I completely agree where CEC is going with this. I'm just not sure this is the method and this is the place for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss?
Well, I'm ready to make a motion, but if you have comments, I'll hold till then.
Thank you. I'd like to. Thank you very much. I think there is an appropriate role for government in this. We're talking about tipping a balance in terms of what people actually do, and the choices that they make are. I agree with you. We make some pretty crazy ones sometimes, but literally, I mean, that little reminder is just maybe all it takes for somebody to make the choice to reach in the trunk or behind the seat and pick up your bag and bring it in, and it really does make a difference. And interestingly, I don't think we've heard a hue and cry from the grocers about even the large retailers about this. For them, in fact, it's kind of a cost reduction when people are not relying on them for their means of conveyance. So I don't think it matters one way or another to them. The plastic bag industry, from whom I believe I recognized a number of the things that Mr. Hotchkiss was saying, is seeing them on websites and on some of the communications we've had. Oh, they're very concerned about this, and they very much have amassed quite a lot of documentation of their own that supports their perspective that the plastic bags are really innocuous in the environment and do very little harm, and that this isn't going to be very effective anyway. But I disagree strongly. Animals do mistake these partially decomposed bags for kelp and for plankton, and they ingest them and they die. And it's very harmful to our environment. And as somebody who spent the biggest part of his life in the water surfing, I mean, there's nothing worse than the kind of, crummy stuff that gets out there. And it's just awful to be surfing in that kind of thing after a big storm and all of it washes out of the creeks and how gross it is. Anything that we can do, I think, as a municipality to participate in what I think is a growing movement, especially among coastal cities, to reduce this impact on the environment, we should do. And the costs are relatively small in the grand scheme of things. In fact, if we do it right, those who normally are really negatively impacted by some of our decisions would be beneficiaries. I think Santa Monica got it right by turning the paper bag fee back to the retailer so that they can actually be a willing participant in this process and not feel like it's a big burden to them. I would very much like us to. I don't know that we're going to get the support here today, but I'd very much like us to see us take option 4 and apply the Santa Monica model to it. We could craft a little less stringent side to the enforcement piece, because I think really having the law out there and having rather modest fines. It doesn't have to be that we need to be the heavy police presence to make this work. We just need to get the standard established. If we don't have support for that, if we can't get there from here, I would hope that the committee would embrace option 2 and to mandate elements of where's your bag, because it really is another way to make sure that there's an even playing field. This has been a little bit of a problem fortunately, Mr. Dixon and his father have done a phenomenal job of turning this into a marketing plus for their organization. People do go to buy from businesses that have an environmental aspect to them. But we have lots of businesses that haven't picked up their end of the stick, and it's critically important that this be applied evenly across the entire field. So at the very least, I hope we could get out of this today with option 2. One other thing I just wanted to say, Mr. Rouse, your comments reminded me of something. I tend to think one of our issues is whether Santa Barbara all by itself can somehow tip the balance. If there were some way for this to be a regional kind of an approach as opposed to just Santa Barbara by itself, I'm sure everybody would be happier. If it were the state doing it somehow, which I don't see any way to get there from here, or if there were something that was multiple counties or something like that, then it would really be more like we're all in it together, kind of. And I hope that if something like that comes your way, you'd be willing to support it. Anyway, I'm going to let Mr. Hotchkiss make his motion.
Yes, I'd like to move that we pass option 1, considering that we continue the education program, that there will be no additional cost to the city, that consumers can continue to choose between plastic and paper or reusable bags, that retailers continue to pass on the cost of bags at approximately 2 or 3 cents per bag, which is apparently what they're doing now. This would have no retailer impact. We disagree on our, it depends whose study I guess you take as to whether this really influences negatively or positively or not at all the marine life, which I do think is an important point. And that retailers could continue to distribute single-use plastic bags, which are cleaner than reusable bags. And staff would continue to promote reusable bags through the voluntary Where's Your Bag program.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any comments to the motion before we take a vote?
I'll second.
Well, I was just going to say that if we didn't pass your motion today, I would be very happy to put forward option 2, because I think that the city at least should take its current program and ratchet it up a little bit, because that's really where we need to go and give our community the best advice they possibly can have and information so they can make informed decisions, not just, just go on with business as usual. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? No. Okay, so the motion passes 2-1. Thank you all very much for coming today. Very much appreciate your input. This goes to City Council, so this is just what's being referred to City Council. Anyone who's watching who wants to have input on this, you'll have another opportunity when it gets to Council. We are adjourned. Thank you.